Tres Vampiras. Chapter 1. Demetrio did not know what had drawn him here. He had not thought about San Miguel de Allende since Colonel Ignacio Allende had lost his head and Father Hidalgo had lost his mind during the War of Independence. Demetrio thought about the war sometimes. It seemed like just a few weeks had passed since then. Sometimes it seemed like far more than 200 years ago. When this town had been his home, he had supported and admired Allende from a distance. But there had been no distance between himself and Father Hidalgo. He had loved Hidalgo, faithfully and abundantly, until the good father invaded San Miguel like the devil himself. Then went on to turn Allende's victories into defeats. Demetrio never understood the changes in Hidalgo during 1810, but invasions are complicated things, and Hidalgo was a complicated man. There were those who called him Zorro, the fox, and for good reason. Demetrio had often reflected upon their conversations before that fateful September night, 200 years ago, and he can see now, or thought he could see, that Hidalgo's hatred of the Guachupines, the wealthy, arrogant Spaniards, consumed him and then twisted him into someone else. When Demetrio confronted the good father with biblical verses intended to calm his loud and ardent hatred, well, Hidalgo could justify anything and could do so eloquently. He would turn the verses to suit his purposes. Conversations increasingly became lectures that Demetrio had little desire to suffer. Hidalgo had been a Jesuit before their order was expelled in 1767 under the Bourbon reforms, and justifications flew rapidly from the mouths of educated minds. Even so, Demetrio loved the man and grieved his death as he grieved what he had become. He would have to revisit those old topics with his friend again, perhaps tonight during dinner. As he stood on the hill overlooking the colorful, winding streets and the ubiquitous church domes that rose from the cheerful rabble like beacons of elegance, he felt no nostalgia, just loss. Where horse-drawn carriages had once slowly ascended the winding, narrow streets of a languid village, now cars too large lurched over the 500-year-old cobblestones. This was not his home. He did not belong here, not anymore. Today, he was merely one of the many tourists admiring the quaint beauty of this artesian community. And just like a tourist, he pulled out a cell phone and called his old friend, Sister Helga. I will be home before dinner. Home, he thought. How could you call a place that you have not been in more than a century home? He walked down Carrero, the busy street that led to the center of town. Carrero was a crowded thoroughfare 200 years ago and is even more so today. He was a bit taken aback to hear a number of people speaking in English, French, and German. Spanish remained, but it was a different Spanish. He had not realized that San Miguel drew an abundance of European tourists, but he did know that the city had become a popular destination for American and Canadian expatriates, usually retirees searching for a cheaper and better way to live the last third of their lives. Here in Mexico, those northerners could have servants, maids for $3 per hour, and gardeners for less. The beige and boredom of the northern suburbs, the banality of reality TV, and the monotony of everyday lives were replaced here by color, magic, art, music, and inexpensive dinners at exquisite restaurants. With such pleasures also came sloth, jealousies, arrogance, self-indulgence, and the whimsical cruelties derived from those with dull minds and full pockets. Therefore, it was a city of two extremes now, the served and the servers. But it was not always that way. There were certainly pretentious, wealthy families in the 1800s, and with those families came sons eager to distinguish themselves among their cohorts and among the locals, but at least everyone spoke Spanish, and even the most arrogant avoided shaming their families. The church was powerful then, perhaps excessively, but provided solidarity and often relief from the grinding poverty visited upon the campesinos. The offensive arrogance of Los Gachupines bound the citizens together against a common and ever-present enemy. But even the most arrogant would stand down at the slight urging of a priest and subsequent slap in the face by their elegant, pious mothers. In those days, wealthy men conversed about grave matters over lovely dinners, but mothers ruled the household. There was no question. Children could argue with their fathers, storm out of a room in anger, but they never argued with their mothers and certainly did not depart without a nod of maternal permission. Demetrio appreciated that kind of respect for the maternal. It was a rather elegant system, but it was built and maintained on the backs of the powerless over whom the elite ruled. Those were the days, though, the days to be alive and on fire with purpose and belief. Belief that things could be changed for the better, that individuals could bring about that change. The war seemed ridiculous to him now, although he had initially been hopeful when the members of the literary and social club of Querétaro had discussed the utopias possible for Mexico free of Spanish rule. The club was a jejune and quixotic group of intelligent men made stupid enough through their association with hope and with each other. Demetrio himself had lived through many revolutions and wars and recognized the patterns and elements of failure from the very beginning, yet he stayed. It was not the sorrow and the consolation of bitter memories associated with that failed war that kept him away from his home for such a long time. The War of Independence ended badly in this area, and most of his friends had been killed, but his reluctance to return came from one source only: a woman he loved. Rose, the only woman he had ever loved. She had run from him in terror and revulsion in 1811. Since then, Demetrio found it a wretched chore to live under the roof that had sheltered them both during happier times. Rose had been dedicated to the war, and therefore Demetrio was as well. His efforts were not only wasted, but they cost him dearly. In the end, he lost her, and even worse, he lost her of her own volition. When Rose had died under a Spanish noose, Demetrio brought her back. He changed her from a human into an immortal lover of the light. That is what he called his kind, the children of the light. He much preferred that phrase to the word vampire. There were plentiful differences between what he was and the popular connotation of that word. But nobody likes to be changed without their consent, even to the light. Demetrio knew, even as he did it, that he was risking their love. Some say that there is a moment of promise right before you die, a moment your senses can comprehend, a moment of beauty. And Demetrio supposed that he had stolen that moment from Rose when he called her back into this world. But both her fear and hatred seemed out of proportion to his action. After all, he'd only wanted to save her life, but no doubt her initial fear had over time amassed unto itself an army of hostility, and she would not see that those hostilities were built and housed on unstable grounds. Yes, he was selfish. Yes, he acted out of selfishness when he brought her back. No, he did not regret it. He could not bear to live without her. But ironically, he had been without her for 2 centuries now. At least she lived. As long as that was true, possibilities remained open. He could see, sometimes, feel her anger coming in from the north. Could feel it riding on bitterness and loathing. In the beginning, he continuously hunted her through her unique frequency that bound him, the creator, to her, the created. Rose could have summoned Demetrio at any time, but she refused to do so. She refused to give him peace. Her parting words to him were, "I will always hate you, Demetrio, hate you for what you took from me." She had remained true to her word thus far, but Demetrio knew that she would be drawn here just as he had been, and that petty resentments would be knocked off the table. How could she avoid his summons and shield her mind was still a mystery to him. It should not have been possible. It was not possible, but there it was. There were obviously things he did not understand about her. When he stopped trying to contact her, she would eventually reach out and pluck at those ties as if to say, "Don't forget you love me. Don't ever forget that you love me." The last time he had tried to reach Rose, he had almost forgotten. He had almost gotten through. He could hear waves breaking and someone groaning, and he could feel her hesitation before she fortified her barriers. That hesitation ruined him because it gave him hope. And hope was a cruel bitch that destroyed everything she touched. Even so, he knew Rose would soon return to this land because something was happening. Something was taking form in this bicentennial year. A pulsing, a slight drumming, resonating through the 7 springs under the town. Some formless thing careened down the tunnels that linked the great houses, that something emanated from the 3rd pyramid just outside the city. The commotion and the energy of the land attracted him like the shimmering thickness in the air before a great storm. He could almost touch it, almost form it to his will.